The reality is, if we're honest though, we still haven't really got the priesthood of all believers. We still have a structure where we sort of see pastors and missionaries as being some sort of elite. And I just think maybe the bivocational thing might actually take that whole structure down a bit. We're going to try and do this job like Jesus would, which means hopefully we approach it with energy and kindness and joy and those sort of things. And we're going to treat our clients as if they were Jesus.
Hey there, and welcome to the Upside Down People podcast. If you're wanting to show the show some support, we'd love it if you leave a rating and review and share it with your family and friends. As always, I'm your host, Caleb, and today I'm joined with a friend of mine, Jarryd, who's a familiar voice on the show. And we're talking to none other than Andrew Hamilton. He's recently written a book called The Future Is Bivocational. And Andrew casts a compelling vision for bivocational mission and ministry. You'll hear throughout the conversation how down to earth he is, and how he has not just rubbed shoulders with people living this out, but he himself has practically sought out opportunities and put himself in positions that allow him to live a bivocational life. So if you're curious about what a bivocational life may look like, or if you're just wanting to find out a bit about who Andrew Hamilton is, this is a great conversation for you to dial into. Let's jump into it. Andrew, welcome to the podcast. We're so glad to be having a conversation with you here today. How are you going?
Doing well, guys. Yeah, just chilling out down in Albany here, quite literally. And looking forward to having a conversation. It'll be really good.
Awesome. What takes you there?
Well, just a bit of a break. So we'd sold one of our businesses. I used to own a reticulation business. So we've sold that. This is my first week of non-involvement with it. So it's a chance to get away and have a bit of a breather. But we also, with a couple of country churches, one of the things we want to do with the time we've freed up is help out some country churches. So I was speaking at Kojano Baptist Church yesterday, and then on the way back through, we'll speak at Pingelly Baptist and catch up with those people. So, I mean, those little country churches struggle for pastors, so it's just nice to be able to lend a hand.
Yeah, very good.
Fantastic. I've actually got some family that attend Pingelly Baptist Church, so I'm sure they will appreciate you being there. And as you said, I think it is people like you who really help out those churches, because they do struggle sometimes to get that consistent pastoral input. So I think that's awesome what you're doing. You kind of alluded to that you're part of pastoral ministry, Andrew. So just give us a little bit more of an idea as to who you are. Tell us about your family, your work, being involved in pastoral ministry, what that's looked like for you.
Yeah, man, we've got to cover 31 years there, so
strap ourselves in.
Could get quite boring after a while. Look, I was a phys ed teacher by background. That was what I set out to be, and I went on a mission trip to the Philippines in my early 20s and decided I wanted to be a missionary. It was just like I had this overwhelming sense of God saying, do that, and I was going to go back there. As it turned out, I finished up being a youth pastor at my own church down in Scarborough. And around the same time, I met this chick at Bible college, and she was pretty cool, and she's in the next room listening to me. So we hooked up and got married and started doing ministry together. So it's been 31 years of doing it together, starting off in youth ministry at Scarborough, moving up to Lesmurdy up in the hills, also as a youth pastor, and then switching into a senior leader role at that church. But all through this, I wanted to plant churches. Now, the thing that was resonating with me was a desire to plant churches and to connect with just ordinary Australian people and see them want to be part of our churches and see them really get faith. So we talked to the Lesmurdy Church about planting a church. We had a really good conversation about it. You know, as Baptists, we voted on it and said yes, but no one really wanted to do it, but I did. And long story short, we set out from there with one of the families. We all sold our houses, bought blocks of land in stage 18A of Butler, and we formed a little missionary community in that suburb with the goal of just unpacking and rethinking exactly what church was and how we were going to connect with Australian people. And we did that for about 7 or 8 years. And look, it was an incredible learning curve. We weren't particularly effective evangelistically, nothing like we'd hoped, but the learning curve was really valuable. And that thing came to a bit of a natural close. And then a local church said, hey, come and be our pastor a couple of days a week. And, you know, I said, no, I don't think he really want us. And, eventually long story short, again, we said yes. And so I went there to pastor 2 days a week, and Danelle picked up a day a week. And the other 3 days of my week, I had this rejig business that I'd started as a hobby. And we took off around Australia in 2009, thinking we were going to have an easy lap of Australia. We'd invested some money. But the money we invested, which we'd borrowed, was $250,000, got swallowed up by a developer who did the dodgy and basically took off with our money. Oh. So we came back to $250,000 debt and this little business and a pastoring gig. And so I just kind of put my hand to running this business really intensely. And what I discovered as I was doing that was that I was actually meeting far more people in my community who I wanted to meet and being part of their lives than ever was a pastor. I'd been a full-time pastor, and look, it was all right, don't get me wrong, but you get far more kudos in a church for preaching good sermons and hanging out with people in the church than you do for hanging out with people outside the church. So the incentive was never there just to go and spend your time out there. But with 2 days a week in a church, I had all the time in the world to go and be part of the world I was part of and part of the community I lived in. And we did that for 15 years. So we've literally we planted another church out of there. 2022 I tell people, was the year I wrote 2 books, planted 2 churches, and ran 2 businesses. Could have started another business as well. Wow. So I was a bit tired by the end of it. And here we are, 2023. We've finished in both churches. We've handed them over to a couple of younger guys. And I sold one business, and I still have a business which involves caravans. So it started off just weighing caravans, but now it's evolved to putting diesel heaters in them, doing other things. So that's kind of what I do with my time. I'm really all I've got on the books is being a caravan guy.
Yeah, right.
Pastoral stuff is as it happens.
So what do you do for fun then?
Look, I have lots of fun. Look, I love to go surfing, and when I can, I'd love to get out there, but it's getting harder. You're a surfer, are you?
I am, yeah. Yeah, correct.
Yeah, right. Are you going down? You're part of the Christian surfers mob?
When I was younger, I used to do a bit of that, but not so much anymore. I've just got a young daughter who's just turned 1, so she's my priority at this point. And then I try get in the water every now and then. Haven't been in as much as I would have liked to, but yeah.
Nice. My daughter's coming down to Denmark on the weekend with the Christian Surfers crew, and we'll go surfing together, hopefully. So
she's awesome.
So yeah. So surfing, I roast coffee, I take drone shots in the local area. I have an Instagram page called Yanchep Beaches 365, where I take a photo of the beach every day. Oh, cool. And that's been really popular with local people.
Is it?
And it's...
sorry, carry on.
No, you go.
I was just going to say, is it of Yanchep Beach, or is it just of beaches each day?
Purely Yanchep beaches.
Yeah.
And I drive past, we live right next to the beach, so I drive past the beach every day. I take a photo, a little video, and out of that came a couple of photo books that I've produced. And, the last book I produced was photos of the local area, but there's also stories of places where we'd seen the kingdom of God sort of form up. So it wasn't a Christian book. It wasn't religious in tone, but it definitely spoke to where goodness and kindness and hope and forgiveness were in our community. So I was just planting a few seeds there. That's been fun.
Sounds like you do quite a bit. Quite the entrepreneur.
Yeah, there is a bit of that. Yeah, always seeing a new opportunity. Yeah. It's just hard. You can't take them all.
Hey, Andrew, one of the main things we wanted to talk about on the podcast today was your new book that has been shortlisted as one of the 2023 Australian Christian Books of the Year. So congratulations on that. The name of the book is The Future Is Bivocational, Shaping Christian Leaders for a Post-Christian World. And there's some really interesting ideas that you unpack in this book. I think probably a good starting point is what are you meaning? What are you talking about when you're referring to bivocational ministry and leadership?
Yeah, sure. So I'm talking to the fact that I think a lot of churches, when they can't afford a pastor, they get someone 2 days a week or 3 days a weck. And the ultimate goal is to get this guy full time. Now, my argument would be that should not be the ultimate goal. My argument would be that our churches and our pastors as well are going to be healthier and better prepared to engage with the world if they do a bit of church work in the areas they're gifted in, and if they get to work in a job in the local area that suits them and that connects them with people. So that's the argument in a nutshell. It rarely works out as perfect as that, but I think I had it tuned in pretty closely in my own sphere.
That's great. Obviously you've spoken, and it sounds like your life has inspired this book. I don't want to make that assumption, but what was the flame that sort of brought this into fruition?
It really was this little business that I called it Brighton Reticulation because it was only ever supposed to be working in the suburb. It was an estate called Brighton, now Butler, but it was only ever supposed to be working in there and doing local jobs and connecting with local people. But after a year or two of doing it, I just realised that I was actually I was connecting with these people and having conversations that I really wanted to have, and meeting people I really wanted to meet who probably were outside my access as a pastor. And yeah, look, I'd been bivocational before, so I'd been a phys ed teacher, and I taught phys ed, and I was a youth pastor at the same time. But it was always with the sense of one day I'll be able to drop the phys ed, and it was never with the sense that this was as important or as valuable. And these days I kind of go, whatever you're doing, it's valuable, whether it's paid pastoral ministry or whether it's teaching or whatever you do. It's all valuable.
Andrew, I think it's a really interesting way to think about pastoral ministry and what it might look like for people going forward. Would you say that the current church model of ministry that we generally see in the West is broken?
That's a good question. And probably it's probably not a yes or no answer. In terms of, there was a study done, this is like 20 years ago, and it asked how many of our non-Christian community would look at church and go, aha, you sing some songs, you listen to a sermon, I'd like to be part of that if I ever wanted to follow Jesus. And it was about 8%, 8 or 9%. It was a pretty minuscule proportion. Part of our journey in planting a church was to try and figure out a better way to do that. And I don't think I don't think it's easy. And probably the reason I say I'm hesitant to say that it's all broken is because we started with a little group of people in a home, and once you got some kids, you need someone to look after those kids. And once you get a bigger group, you need someone to meet. And the easiest way to do it is to sit in rows. So I kind of go, I see how this whole thing evolves, but I do think there are things that we could do to be far more effective. I do think it's just an assumption we take. It's the inherited model. We go, this is what we do. And I kind of want to go, well, we don't have to. But that's quite disturbing for a lot of people, particularly pastors.
Do you mind elaborating a bit further in terms of like what as a pastor, what do you find disturbing within those like cultural assumptions about what church should look like?
I think church, for those of us who've been part of it all our life, it doesn't seem unusual. But for anyone who walks in for the first time, it's quite threatening, and it's quite a unusual environment. I remember Phil Baker, when he was preaching River, he had a friend come and he said, look, I didn't mind the karaoke, but what's with all the Hitler salutes? And he's kind of talking about people raising their hands in the air. He go, that was his interpretation of what church was. Yeah. Well, yeah, from this point of view, maybe it looked like that.
That's actually, I've had a similar experience with a friend of mine who came from overseas, and she came to church with us, and the exact same thing was like, it was very weird and uncomfortable how people were doing these Hitler salutes. So yeah, that's a great point. There's things that we like don't notice that feel normal to us that for an outsider coming in can be very disruptive or off-putting.
And it's really hard because we are Christians and we're going to be distinctive and we're going to do things that are going to be part of our culture. So it's a degree to which we accept that. So I kind of feel like inviting people to church is like when you're dating and you say, look, this is getting pretty serious. Why don't you come and meet the family? and you meet mum and dad, and you meet the crazy uncle and all the weird kids that are part of the family. So I feel like that's where coming to church belongs for the average person who isn't a Christian.
Right.
It's not the first one, I think. So yeah, look, I guess, the other things that would be tricky are you can sit in church and be relatively unaffected by anything. You can walk in, walk out, and have very little relationship. As a pastor, I can assume people are listening when I'm preaching. They might not be. I know I'm certainly not always listening when someone's preaching. And that's our mode of communication that we engage in almost primarily. Look, we've been kind of spoiled. The last probably 15 years, the church we've been part of has been very down to earth. It meets on a Sunday, but it's very simple, very relaxed, shoes optional kind of gig. And we've been able to be ourselves in that. So people talk to me about what church is like and think, oh, yeah, crikey, I remember that. It ain't like that for us anymore.
Yeah, very good. I was just going to say, I think it's important to make that distinction as well, as the gospel isn't owned by one particular culture, and similar with the outworking of church isn't owned by one particular culture. So the outworking of how that looks, like, we should be able to see differences in churches. So it's very interesting how there's this sort of very similar model in the West that we found, but it's also very important to understand that that's not the ideal or the aim, but to be open to, like, the gospel actually breaks down those barriers often.
That's a good point.
Yeah, look, I think what we've done is, John Smith used to say this, he'd say, we picked up the British model, we got colonised, and we did church like Britons. And then we looked to America and went, oh, those guys are really smart because the church is really big, so we'll do the American thing. But we haven't really figured out what the Australian thing is, if there is such a thing.
Yeah.
Well, we certainly look to other countries or other sources for our inspiration. And I think we could certainly do better just to kind of go, what's it mean for a bunch of Australian people to follow Jesus and gather around, the scriptures and prayer and worship? What's that look like?
Yeah, very good.
So, Andrew, just getting back to this idea of bivocational ministry and leadership, and I think it's a very interesting way that you propose we think about ministry going forward, and I think a very logical way as well, with the way you articulate it. But I think a follow-up question that a lot of people would have is this model of ministry biblical? And some of the examples that you use in your book, and the one that stood out to me was Paul as the tent maker, the Apostle Paul, and I even think of Jesus as a carpenter. Maybe you can just kind of touch on that point and elaborate on that.
Yeah, I just think it's really interesting that when Jesus came, when the incarnation happened, he was chippy for, however many years, 15, 20 years, and before he ever started doing any ministry. Now, interesting that he put down the tools to go and do his ministry, whereas Paul obviously did a bit of both. But yeah, both are great pictures. And when Jesus tells stories, often he drew from his experience, probably it's probably more accurate to call him a builder. But he was a businessman, so obviously you're part of a small business. So his stories are taken from business and taken from the experiences that people have in everyday life. And I just know when I go to speak in church, I'm never short of a story. Never short of a story of a difficult client or something that went wrong on the day, and the ethical challenges and all those things that we face in discipleship. It's the beauty of being bivocational is I'm facing the same stuff the people in my church are facing. So when I come to speak on Sunday, it's still like I'm living in a different world. I'm in exactly the same world. And when I rock up to a leaders meeting and they're all really knackered at 7:30 at night, I'm pretty knackered too, because I probably run 100 metres of turf and I'm tired, so I know how it feels. And I think that's great, because you don't have these ridiculous expectations that people will come to your leaders meetings just pumped and having spent 5 hours in prayer that afternoon. Reality is no one has. As much as we might wish that.
Yeah. I'm yet to meet a pastor who's spent 5 hours of prayer before a leaders meeting, so maybe onto something there. I'd love to hear your perception of how the gospel informs the way we as believers should engage with our work.
Yeah, I think that's great. I just think the whole Sermon on the Mount for me has probably been a source of thinking through how we live in this world as Christians, but how we live distinctively. Mike Frost talks about living questionable lives. I don't know whether you've read his book, Surprised by something. Surprise the world. That's it. Surprise the world. And he talks about living questionable lives. So I just feel like, when we encounter situations every day, we have choices as to how we respond. So as an example, when I ran my recheck business, occasionally people would go, "You're kidding. $500 for recheck? That's just ridiculous. I don't want to pay that." So one of my responses became, rather than fighting, I just say, "Well, look, why don't you tell me what you think it's worth to you, and you can pay that." And I thought that was a kind of a Jesus way to turn the other cheek, or to, avoid conflict. So look, this is not just about me making money out of you. You tell me what it's worth. And I only had a couple of people really, shaft me on that. Most people will, "Well, this is kind of how I see it, and this is what I think it's worth." I go, "Fair enough, you pay that now. That's no worries. I'll just change the invoice." So I think for most business people, that sounds absurd.
Yeah.
But it actually really took the heat off me, some money, and getting into conflicts with people. And most people are decent people. Yeah.
It sounds like a very relational way of doing business, which you mentioned is unconventional.
It is. I guess the Sermon on the Mount for me was all about, Jesus said, "You've heard it said, but now I say to you." So I kind of go, "Well, you've heard it said, don't let any people get away with anything. But now I say to you, oh, look, why get a bad name over a few $100? Or, let's surprise them with a way of dealing with this that maybe has them go, what the heck was that guy thinking?" I didn't come across a business person like that. So that'll be part of my hope.
And just out of curiosity, in terms of, did any conversations come from that sort of led to the reasoning behind why you did what you did?
Not really. It didn't come to a point where anyone kind of said, "Hey, what's the deal here?"
Yeah.
Most people kind of felt, "Well, yes, that's fair," and hope you've learned something, Mr. Hamilton. Maybe you'll charge less in future. No, look, but I don't know what goes on in their minds.
Yeah.
I had one guy, his mum used me, and she's an older lady, and after working at the place all afternoon, it came to about $450, and I knew it was a big sum of money, and I'd kept her in touch the whole way. I'd done all the right things, but I went home and said, "I'm going to have to come back and finish off." And that night I got a phone call from him, really angry that I'd taken advantage of his mum and deceived her, and he told me, she thought I was only going to charge $50 an hour, and I was charging $90. And look, I've never charged $50 an hour, and I worked for her before. So I said to him, "Look, you go away, rewrite the invoice, and tell me what you think it's worth." And this was the guy who came back with something like $200. And on the phone call, he was talking about how his mum was struggling. I said, "Look, I have an idea. Why don't we just make it completely free for her? Why don't we just wipe this thing all together?" And that really threw him. He can't do that. I said, "Yeah, I can. It's my business. I can do whatever I like." He said, "No, you can't." He said, "It wouldn't be fair." I thought, it's already not fair. Let's just change it up a bit. So look, that was another incident where you go, okay,
that's remarkable.
I hope that was a Jesus way to respond.
Yeah.
I hope one day, I bump into him and he goes, "You're that guy." And anyway, didn't get that, but it might make him think.
That's a beautiful story, Andrew. And it just makes me think about how often it can be difficult for us to give grace to other people, right? But it's just as hard to receive grace, because we go, "I don't deserve this." And we don't. That's the whole point of grace, right? And so I think that's just such a good illustration as to what the gospel looks like in everyday life. Hey, one of the topics that I wanted to pick your brains on, and I think this has been talked about a little bit more over the last maybe 10 or 20 years, and one of the guys that has kind of shaped my thinking about it a little bit, and you use as a reference point in your book, was the German reformer Martin Luther, who I'm sure a lot of people would be familiar with. But I guess this idea that all of life is lived before the face of God, and at times us Christians seem to make this unhelpful distinction between the sacred and the secular. And those people that are really successful and good Christians are the ones that are pastors, and they're doing something that is very obviously related to the church or ministry. But do you think that way of thinking can be harmful to our Christian lives and the way we think about living as Christians?
Absolutely. If we perceive ministry or missionary work as a higher calling, as we sometimes speak about it, then we go, well, you're just a teacher. And I can't remember what you do, Caleb, but, some social services on. But, it degrades what you do.
Yeah.
And Luther was the guy who actually really kicked that in the guts. Reality is, if we're honest, though, we still haven't really got the priesthood of all believers. We still have a structure where we sort of see pastors and missionaries as being some sort of elite. And I just think until we actually, maybe the bivocational thing might actually take that whole structure down a bit, because you can't be elite when you're only part-time in a church. I think it's much harder. And certainly I think the way we refer to ourselves can help that too. So, you will never hear anyone call me Pastor Andrew. We just don't do that. So it just means I'm just Andrew. In fact, I'm Hamo. And that's who I'm to most of our congregation.
Yeah, very good. What, just off the back of that, what's some practical habits or disciplines or practices that you've engaged with or put into place to try and sort of combat that sacred versus secular mindset that's very present in our culture?
I don't know about habits, I suppose. Look, I have conversations with people when I was a pastor. I would say I do three things. I lead the leadership team, I teach, and I meet with blokes. So when I met with blokes, I would talk to them about their work, and I'd talk to them about where they were experiencing God in their work or what challenges they're having and how it came to responding to those challenges in a Christ-like way and those sort of things. So it was just, look, it was, I don't have any specific practices, so I'd just be making stuff up. It's just, I just figure it as I go.
Yeah.
Honestly. Yeah.
And
sometimes it's really wrong. I told you some good story. I could tell you about the Irish guy who owed me $60, and every time we got on the phone, we get into this argument. And he was just, something about him pushed my buttons. There are a couple of stories like that where I just think, I didn't manage that like Jesus at all. But, that's how it is sometimes. Sometimes we just can't. We stuff it up.
Yeah, and that's awesome. I love the humanity that you're showing, Andrew. Yeah, I appreciate it, and the vulnerability. I think that's a big part of it.
And look, probably that is something that I think we need to do more of as Christian leaders. I just hate you guys to go away thinking there's a guy who's incredibly generous and really, whatever. Look, there are people who just piss me off like piss anybody off. That's just how it is. And sometimes we do really well with that, and sometimes we do really badly with that. And you can cut out the word piss if it's inappropriate.
That's all right. It reminds me, there's a part in your book where I've never thought of this, but you sort of mentioning something of the thought that maybe Jesus went through in being a chippy is he had to deal with people that weren't necessarily happy with his work. And I was like, that's true. He would have had a human response to that. That we can think. Yeah,
I can just imagine Jesus chasing people who owe debts, and Jesus having to deal with that lady who's always complaining. And I'm sure he had it.
And that's one of the themes in your book as well that I did appreciate, Andrew. And you mentioned it already, but the incarnational nature of Jesus, that he's fully God and fully man. And so because of that, he is this sympathetic high priest to us. And, I think our Christian lives, a lot of the time, if we're honest, are sometimes quite mundane and repetitive. And we're in our workplaces every day and we're doing our best to love God and love other people, and it's messy and it doesn't always go to plan. But I think Jesus can relate to that. And I think that does something for us, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Look, most of life is mundane and repetitive. You get up and you go to work, you come home and repeat. That's kind of how life is. So just being able to kind of go, well, this is my life. And it's, there are moments in it that are really full of joy and you achieve things. But sometimes I was a retic bloke who was just digging holes and laying pipe and there was no one around. And so you just think to yourself, well, I'll dig good holes and lay good.
Shit, that's honestly.
That's probably it. Yeah, and you guys know in your jobs there are often you're not allowed to speak of Jesus, let alone move beyond that. So there are challenges in our culture these days too around that.
Mm. I love that perspective as well, that like our work can be worship, and it doesn't have to be this intense moment every time where it's like you feel the Spirit of God just raining down on you, but it is in the mundane. And it reminded me, I'm not too sure if you've come across the author Ronald Rolheiser or Ron Rolheiser, but he wrote a book called Domestic Monastery, and it talks about how like parents are almost like monks in the way they go about their lives. So it's like they have these constant interruptions in their daily life with kids. And in those interruptions, it's moments like that remind them to reflect on the goodness of God and on Christ. And it's the same with like, that's a form of work, or if you're going down laying pipes or doing retic, we've got those opportunities in the mundane to think of the goodness of God. So I just love how, again, that breaks down that whole thing of there's this secular and there's this sacred, and it brings it back to, well, we're just one being, and we're created in the image of God. So it's just a beautiful, it's like a light, and like Jesus' burden is light and easy. And we're created as a whole human, and this is part of the human experience.
And I think to add on to that, I think we just need to be who we are in our workplace too. So some people are extroverted and outgoing, and they naturally will speak of what they do with their week and where their heart goes. And other people are quite quiet and introverted. I just think too long we've had this paradigm or this caricature of what it means to be a Jesus follower at work, where you have to move the conversation around to faith at some point. That can be really awkward. I reckon just roll with it, and if it comes up. If it doesn't, it doesn't.
Yeah.
God's got that.
We definitely put this unnecessary pressure on ourselves at times, don't we? That I wonder if even the Bible itself doesn't call for. These man-made regulations that we almost put on ourselves that aren't even biblical commands at times. And I think Jesus' burden being easy and his yoke is light. That's just such a beautiful way to do life with God, isn't it? One thing related to what you were saying there, Andrew, in your book, you talk about calling and vocation related to our work, and I found it really helpful the way you distinguish between our primary and secondary callings as believers. Could you unpack that a little bit more?
Yeah. So if we're talking about primary and secondary, so there's no question that the primary thing would be we're called to love God and love others. Just got to turn a light on. Just give me a second.
Looking better already.
Yeah, you can probably see me better now. I realised I was just becoming a fuzzball.
Yeah, this black's got a face.
So I think the love God and love other thing, it's obvious. If you read the book, you would have seen my example of, my wife. I asked her when we go to plant a church, do you know what we're doing? I asked her a few times, and then she just said, yeah, look, I think so. You want me to love God and love others? And I went, oh, yeah, we do. and what she was referring to was our primary vocation. The thing that I was really asking was about the secondary vocation, was, do you get that we are going to be missionaries, and we're going to really rethink church and mission for a 21st century Western world? And so for me, my secondary vocation, if you like, or my real sense of calling, is to be someone who communicates the Christian faith to ordinary Australian people in ways that make sense. That's what I want to do. So when I felt called to be a missionary back when I was 23, I was right. I just got the location wrong. I felt like God said, no, I want you in the first world. I want you to relate to Aussie people, and particularly people who don't really do church that well. So that's probably a bit of my sweet spot.
And Andrew, can I just ask you, just tapping a little bit more into that idea of vocation and calling? I know when I have wrestled with that myself, what my calling is, for me personally, is Jarryd Morell, a Christian in Perth. and what that might look like in my work, and speaking to a lot of different Christians, and because this word calling is used a lot in Christian settings, isn't it? And I think there's a lot of weight and emphasis put on it. And I have found at times for myself and in conversations with others that sometimes the weight and emphasis put on that, and I think it's mostly related to the secondary aspect of calling that you've referred to, not the primary, that it becomes quite crushing and burdensome for people because they start to fear that somehow they're going to miss God's calling on their life, and then they're somehow going to be out of his will, or they're not going to fulfill all the purposes that he had for them. I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think one of the things I realised after talking with my wife is she said, look, not everyone's got a laser sense of calling. I have a very sharp sense of this is who God's made me to be. For other people, maybe God has simply made you to love God and love other people. And within that, you might have a bunch of different jobs. You might... within that, you love God and love other people. Maybe it doesn't need to be specific and, laser tipped. One of the guys I quote in my book, Miroslav Volf, he talks about how calling can change over time and how, it's part of our gifting in the circumstances we're in. I think that's quite interesting. For me, it's been very constant. So my calling has never been to be a retic bloke or to work on caravans. My calling has been to, being Christian in leadership and be a missionary. And those things have given me the opportunity to do that. But certainly I just think I'd hate for people to be walking around thinking I'm wasting my life. I don't know what God wants me to do. You're probably doing it there.
Yeah, very good. A question I'm curious about, just it sort of comes up whenever you're talking about work or not you particularly, but just the general conversation around work, and then you hear it a lot in circles of ministry, is that one around burnout. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on what that looks like. Why do you think people, especially in ministry, struggle with burning out? And perhaps what are some things that can we do to prevent that?
I think possibly it's the expectations thing. There are some pretty big expectations often put on pastors when they go to churches. Like I think every church I've been to, there's an expectation when you arrive that you will make it all work again, all will be well because you are here. And that's just nonsense. So I think that's one of the things that we need to kind of perhaps change is our expectations. We live in a pretty tough culture. So certainly in terms of burnout, that'd be one of the things I'd say, look, and maybe pastors need to have reasonable expectations of themselves. So for me, I had 2 days a week of work, and I would simply say those are the 3 things I do: lead, teach, meet with blokes. And look, I'll do a little bit of admin, I'll do a funeral if I have to, that sort of stuff, but I'm not coming around to your house to visit you and have cups of tea. That's not my thing. And that was just how it was, and people got used to it. So maybe if we took the pressure off ourselves in terms of expecting ourselves to be the Messiah, maybe we just relax and we're allowed ourselves to be who we are, we might just find it a lot easier. So people say to me, how do you manage being bivocational? I go, well, it's great.
Yeah.
It really is. It's very little pressure because I get to choose what I do. I get to choose how much work I say yes to, and I get to choose, what I do within the church, and to a large extent, how I operate in that space.
Yeah, that's great. Andrew,
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that I found really helpful about your book, Andrew, and why this conversation is helpful for a lot of people is, even though your target audience in the book seem to be primarily people that are in pastoral ministry and how they might think about the way they do pastoral ministry going forward, the way that you talk about vocation and work and calling and identity, I think a lot of those things are so applicable to absolutely everyone. And I know for myself, the question of identity is one that we really closely link to work, finding our self-worth, our value, in what we do. And I think that is a struggle for a lot of people. I know it has been for myself, if I'm being honest. I wonder if particularly maybe for us men, we have a certain bent towards that being the case, maybe more so than others. I'm not sure. How have you thought about your identity as Andrew Hamilton and your work and how you understand yourself in relation to your work?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's interesting having stepped back from 2 roles now. So I'm no longer a pastor officially. I still feel like a pastor, but I'm no longer a pastor. I'm no longer a retic bloke. And I got to say, I don't feel like a retic bloke, and I'm really glad about it. I'm glad the other guys have picked that up. I'm done. But there is a degree of your identity that gets consumed in certain roles. I think I'd find it hard if I was incapacitated and couldn't run a business, couldn't do the things I enjoy. I'd really struggle with that. So yeah, there certainly is some of that wrapped up in the actual tasks and the things that we do. But I guess if I came back to my real laser sense of calling, which is to be a missionary in the Western world, I go, well, I can figure that out. If I'm in a wheelchair, if I'm incapacitated, I can still figure out what that looks like for me in some way or other. Yeah.
Yeah, very good.
So I think, I don't know if that helps. Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you see that working out for yourself going forward, being a missionary in the Western world?
Yeah, look, at the moment, my job involves me weighing caravans, checking people's weight and putting diesel heaters in them and doing a few other odd jobs on caravans. I do it mostly from home, so people come to me. So it's not as, I said to my wife, it's not as targeted, not as local as my last job was. So in that I go, that's not ideal. But what was going through my head when I started the caravan business was checking weights is the thing that really matters to caravanners. Now, if we're going to work in some country towns and help some country churches out, I could just whack up a sign out the front of the caravan park that says we're going to be doing this for a few hours each day. Drop in, we'll do your caravan. And we could help a church out. We could make some money. We keep ourselves alive, whether the church could pay us or not. We could be mobile. We could roam. I think that's what Paul did with his tent making. He walked around. He went to different places, kind of kicked up a business, got a job. I think we could do that. So I think that's what I'm hoping for, is we will be allowed to be mobile as we need to be.
Yeah.
Hey, Andrew, one of the aspects of your book where you do delve quite deeply into how we might better understand work biblically, and you unpack some misconceptions that we have around work. You talk about one of the misunderstandings we can sometimes have as Christians is work as a curse, and how people they draw on that conclusion from the book of Genesis. So how do you think we can more biblically see and understand work, and maybe join to that, how much satisfaction can we realistically expect from our work?
Well, probably first thing I'd do would be rule a line right through the idea that work is cursed, because I just think we need to erase that from our hard drive. Work existed before the fall. Work was given to us by God as something to give purpose and meaning to our lives and as a way to serve. So I'd say, okay, let's rule that out. Now, the second part of your question, I've forgotten. Just say it again.
So it was, how much satisfaction can we realistically expect from our work?
Oh, yeah. That's a really good question. Because I feel like in the Western world, we feel like we have a right to feel our work is meaningful and significant, and I find great joy in it. I think we feel like that's our right. So I just think you talk to the average Balinese taxi driver, and he's probably not feeling that. So whether we have a right to feel meaning and joy, and that is, I guess that's questionable. There's some people for whom their work is just a means of making money to support their family. Within it, if they go with the right attitude, I'm sure they can find some joy. But not everyone gets that privilege. I think we have a privilege over here in that regard.
Very good. What encouragement would you give to someone who's feeling like they're stuck in a position of, whether it's a job, a career, whatever it may look like, feeling stuck in that position, feeling like it's lifeless. It's sucking the joy out of every day. They're just going through the motions. They feel like a empty shell. What encouragement would you give to someone wrestling with those sort of feelings?
Okay, probably two options. One is you're in the wrong job. You need to get out and go do something you really enjoy if you can. But if you can't, and look, some pastors are in this position.
Yeah.
So this is the weird thing. Some people are serving God, leading churches and really wanting out. If you can't, then you've got to be able to somehow focus your attention on asking the question, what would it look like to do this job in a Christ-like way? And how do I treat my clients in a Christ-like way? For me, that was, when I've had young guys come work with me, I just kind of say, look, we're going to try and do this job like Jesus would, which means hopefully we approach it with energy and kindness and joy and those sort of things. And we're going to treat our clients as if they were Jesus. So hopefully we treat them in a way that is above and beyond what maybe someone else would treat them. So maybe they would be things I'd say, why don't you go back in with a new approach and try that and see if it makes any difference. If not, maybe you're in the wrong job. But, life's never as simple as that. We can't just always change jobs, can we?
No, but I do like that response, how, trying to think of what is a gospel way to approach it. And it takes the pressure off trying to be this perfectly energized person that shows up to work, and it puts the pressure on Jesus, who can handle that burden and say, okay, can you show up today to give me the strength to...
That's great.
Yeah,
absolutely. You framed that really well. That's what I would love to be able to have people say, just, Jesus, what do you want me to do today? How do I conduct myself in the space today?
And how simple is that? We often complicate this thing so much. And
it's a lot easier said than done.
Oh, it is, isn't it? Love God and love people. How hard could that be? Oh, very hard. But I also think about, Andrew, just the seasonal nature of life. And I think about my own work life and how there's been so much fluctuation with, sometimes I'm just loving it. And then sometimes I'm really struggling in that particular sphere of my life. Have you found that in your own working life as a pastor, and even with your reticulation business and your caravan business, kind of those peaks and troughs and those different seasons of life?
Yeah, look, with the reaching business, I had what I call quitting season, which was usually about January, February, when the work would just be coming at me way, way greater than I could manage it. I mean, one of the very strategic and intentional things we did was we said, we're not going to run this business more than 3 days a week. So when the scammers would get on the phone and go, we can make you lots of money, I'd say, no, look, I don't need more money and more jobs. I need less money and less jobs, because we really wanted to keep that pace. So for us, that was really important. I've lost my train of thought. What was the question again? There's a reason I was telling you.
The seasonal nature, I guess, of work and life in general at times, the peaks and troughs. Have you found that in your own experience? Yeah,
I would go through periods when I just wanted out, when my body was sore or the business was just too crazy. So I guess I've learned how to manage them over time. I just learned to say no to some jobs. One of the things that a piece of advice someone gave me was really good. They said, put your prices up by 20%, because what will happen is you lose probably 20% of your customers. You make the same amount of money for less work. Like, that's really clever. So there are little things that have helped. And look, we actually ride the seasons really well. So I'll kind of go, look, it's spring, it's summer, it's going to be busy. But hey, come autumn, I'm going surfing. Come July, we hit the road, we'll go wherever we like. So learning how to adapt to the seasons can be really, really helpful.
That's awesome. Yeah, brilliant.
I guess as teachers, you got to run hard for 10 weeks and you get a couple of weeks off.
Oh, thank the good Lord for that, eh? Those couple of weeks. Although, enjoy those.
Yeah, teachers seem to have the. I don't know if this is your experience, Andrew, but I've never met a teacher who's not complained about the length of their holiday. It's always too short. They don't have enough time.
We're an entitled bunch, I'll tell you that. We earn our holidays because we work so hard.
Look, I know a lot of teachers I know these days are not getting 2 weeks off. Yeah. I know they're not.
Yeah,
they're working it off. So, yeah. Teaching's a tough.
How important is finding that balance and that ability to say no like you're saying, I think it's such an important thing that you did is to simplify and say, we're working for 3 days. How important is it to build that ability to say no and put those boundaries in?
I think it's really important. If we're going to have space in our lives, and I think you guys suggested often the interruptions or the things that, the moments that God shows up are the times when, we have space. If I'm running full tilt for 5 days or 6 days even, I probably don't have time to actually cue into the fact that someone's asking for help or someone's throwing a line out there that says, I know you're a Christian. What goes on there? I probably miss those cues. But if I can pace myself and have space to listen to people, I think I can be effective in mission. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Really important.
Hey, Andrew, one topic that I have noticed is being increasingly discussed, even in the secular world over the last 10 years, I feel more so than ever, is the concept of rest and how we find rest. We live in a world that a lot of people argue is as busy as ever. We're hurrying around everywhere. We're distracted. There's lots of noise and input coming from all directions, technology, just the pace of life in the West. How have you found trying to establish a rhythm of work and rest in your own life? How have you wrestled with that? Has that been something that's been important to you? Do you intentionally have a Sabbath inbuilt into your life? What does that look like for the Hamiltons?
There was a period in my life where I was a workaholic, and that was when I was probably really trying to be a full-time pastor. I was studying theology and leading a youth ministry and just wanted to be the next kingpin youth pastor. The caricature of the person you want to be. That was where I was moving towards, and nearly busted up in marriage. The thing that turned me on my head was we had a daughter, and I kind of went, wow, I want to hang out with this kid. That's not going to happen as I work my butt off. So I kind of came to, there was a whole bunch of other things went on, but came to a place of just realizing I do not want to be that guy who's just always busy and never has time. And I'm good at doing stuff and good at getting busy, but I really wanted to have space in life just to be able to, talk to a neighbour when he's sitting out the front, or, go out to dinner with friends. So in terms of an intentional Sabbath, I don't have one that probably looks like, doesn't look like it too. Saturday's my day off, but I'm not ruthless about that, because sometimes someone rings and I want to take the call. Sometimes I want to go and do something with someone on a Saturday. So I used to be pretty ruthless about it, but I think our life now has lived. It's lived. I had someone ask me once. They were doing a pastors' conference. They interviewed me for this, saying, "How do you go back to the well?" So the idea being that we regularly go back to this well, we draw water, and we then go back out. I said, "Look, I don't think I'm going back to the well so much anymore as just living by the well." So that'd be the image I would use: living close to the well so that I can dip in, every time I need to. But sometimes I run hard for a long period of time, and other times I take big gaps. But I never feel, should say never, not never. I rarely feel like I'm just run off my feet and just cannot cope. Life has changed in that regard. Living by the well.
That's a awesome perspective that I think a lot more of us can wrestle with, what that looks like in our own personal lives and how to create that space and find that balance.
I think Jesus did that, So I think, look, he intentionally took time away to be with the Father. But there are times, I think it's Mark's gospel, where he goes and takes time away and a bunch of people rock up. And he goes, whatever. That's just how it is. He's going, well, there's a party. Yeah. Okay, I'm in.
Right.
You had to turn some water into wine.
That's right. He'll do what he has to do. And so he interrupted his rest at times for people, and I think I can too. Yeah. It's Sabbath is principle of the law.
Yeah, that's very good. And it's important being able to have that margin to be able to do that. If you haven't created that margin in your life and you are a workaholic and you just won't have the ability to engage with those opportunities and potentially either be blessed by others or be a blessing to others. So yeah, I think that's really important, and thanks for sharing.
It's so true. If you guys can create space in your lives where you're not flat out, stuff will happen that maybe you don't see coming, but God's got planned there.
Yeah. On that, I was just chatting to a friend earlier this week and about this podcast, The Future Is Bivocational, and they're in ministry and they're saying like it's been making its way around. Lots of people are talking about it, and you're a Perth boy, and they're like, I didn't even know the book was written by someone in Perth, and they're just very grateful for it. So thanks so much for making the time and putting aside the time and creating the margin to have this conversation with us here today, Andrew. We really appreciate it.
I really value it. I am lousy at marketing and self-promotion. You know, my book may sit there. Someone may pick it up in 30 years' time and go, hey, this is good. But I just don't have the time or the energy to self-promote. So this sort of stuff really helps me. And those were some great questions you guys asked. So I appreciate you've read the book and you've taken the time to really interact with the ideas. And it's good to have a conversation. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
Great.
Really appreciate taking time.
Appreciate your time, Andrew.
Awesome. Thank you.